1, and we're live. Greetings, friends of the apocalypse. This is Jared the Apocalypse, Nerd Wallace from Podcast at Ground Zero, episode 38, The Cold Apocalypse. As always,
don't you think we should have had this be episode 32, since that's the temperature in Fahrenheit that water freezes?
All right, moving on. Yes, but we didn't think of it until last week.
Yeah, we really didn't.
Joining us, is my stalwart co-host, Adam Bond Glancy, and joining us this week is a special guest because he doesn't come on as much as William Thrasher, so he really is a special guest. We have Clint Odin Staples, yay! And I only say that, Clint, because you posted that picture on Facebook. You're like, I'm looking more like Odin all the time with your eye patch and the Viking helmet on. So
that was my son's idea.
Did you? How many? I guess you don't have a horse, but does your cat have 8 legs? I see your cat stalking around behind you.
No, that is not a beneficial mutation for either, Scott. So no. Okay. I do have a spear, if that helps.
That does.
That does. So you were a sacrifice in Odin yourself to yourself.
Myself to myself. Yeah. Which actually doesn't sound as brave or as heroic as you want it to nowadays on the internet. So no.
No, it does not. So
downplay that.
So Clint Staples, guys, folks, he's been with us before. He's a game designer. He's a sculptor, and as he states now, he's all-around apocaloon. So, which I like.
Loon is the national bird of Canada, right? So
perfect.
So yes, Clint is from the Great White North, and since we're talking about the cold and the apocalypse, I thought it would be perfect to have Mr. Staples on because he is in the cold apocalypse right now. He states it's currently about negative 25 degrees Celsius for all us,
non-barbarians down here in the south.
Exactly. Who use, what is it? What are we? Are we imperial or they're the metric, we're imperial.
Yeah.
See, the result of American education. But he says it's about 25 degrees Celsius metric and about minus 15 below imperial or Fahrenheit.
Something like that. I don't do Fahrenheit anymore, so I could be wrong. It might be a few degrees either way. So.
You know what? If you're still stating it's negative, you're fine. The ballpark is good because it's still ass cold.
It is ass cold. Yeah.
There's a temperature, isn't there, where Fahrenheit and Celsius meet up exactly? It's in the negative somewhere.
40. I think it's 40.
Yeah.
Oh God.
We've had days like that. We haven't had any this year, but we're still getting. January is our coldest month, so we could hit minus 40 yet. So.
All right. Well, we're gonna have to completely shake you down for all the horrifying Jack London details of what it's like out there. Because
to build a fire.
Oh my God.
Who didn't read that in frickin' middle school, right?
Yes, yes. Which is why that shtick with the tauntaun worked so good in Empire Strikes Back, because my school had prepped me with some Jack London before we got there.
So as the audience, you're going to be talking about the cold, and like I said, Mr. Staples lives that, so we wanted to have him on. So we're going to talk about the cold and the apocalypse. There are some movies out there, not an overwhelming amount. It's not like zombies where you can't shake a stick without hitting. And there's not really a cold. I mean, there's Dead Winter with the Nazis, frozen Nazi zombies.
Yeah, it was. I'm forgetting the name. Yeah.
Dead Snow.
Dead Snow. Yes, with the Nazi zombies in Norway, which sounds like a great idea.
But shouldn't zombies freeze?
Well, that was sort of that's one of your tropes that. When did we start seeing zombies freezing, Jared? Was it in the Walking Dead comic book?
No, it was
Max Brooks.
Yeah, he's the one who popularized it. But if you remember, I talked about that before Max Brooks said it, and this is only because it was in the 90s. I was still working at Publix. For folks who don't know that's a grocery store chain in Florida in the southeast. I was working in produce, which is next to the meat department, and I was, again, because I'm a hipster, I was into zombies before zombies were zombies, and I was thinking about it because I was watching the guys in the meat department, and they were taking the meat out of the freezer before they cut it. I'm like, well, why do you guys do that? They're like, well, it's easier to cut when it's frozen. Yep. So because they would cut it on the bandsaws, like the big hunks of meat. So they'd freeze it first and then cut it, and I'm like, and that got me thinking. I'm like, okay, well, that's dead meat, no circulation, and it freezes in the cold. Zombies are meat. Wouldn't they freeze in the cold? So I was already thinking about it, and then of course Max Brooks wrote about it. And of course, everything's Max Brooks' idea. He did it first. So.
Well, remember, he's had your house under surveillance for the past like 10 years,
20 years.
20 years.
More importantly, Jared, you were a double hipster because you were into zombies before it was cool, and then you came up with the freezing zombie before it was cool.
Oh, dude, I'm like a quadruple hipster.
I was gonna say that. The zombies from Dead Snow have a supernatural aspect. It's something to do with Nazis and the occult. So
I'm good with that. I mean, the Old Norse mythology is filled with all kinds of that wander through the snow and ice and stuff like that. So
what's it called? The Ragnar or something?
Pardon?
There's something like the Ragnar. It's like a barrow wight or a something that guards graves from desecration. They've got a.
They're called Draug.
Draug.
Or Draugr for plural. And there's different kinds of them, and they have different capacities, sort of like different interpretations of vampires in Southern Europe. But they're definitely supernatural. They definitely inhabit the barrows that they were buried in. And they are certainly able to move around at night in the cold, rather, in the winter. So
it would be a pretty pathetic supernatural monster in Scandinavia that didn't just walk around in the cold with its balls out, going ha ha ha, whatever, you mortals.
Okay, I'm a Draug, so it's August, so I'll see you guys in April. So have fun, I'll be back April 15th or so.
Mark your calendars. Revenge is coming.
Yeah. So.
All right. So the Dead Snow zombies were supernatural, and we haven't really had a lot of snow apocalypses. We got a really short list of apocalypses where we were done in by the fact that it was cold outside. Did we lose Jared?
Yeah. No, I'm losing you guys.
Okay,
we're having some bad connections.
Okay.
Yeah, we're having bad connections this time around.
All right. I see you moving now, but for a moment there, you're
frozen.
You're frozen there for a second.
All right. Well, I'm back. All right, but before we get a little more deep into it, the only thing I really have to share, just a couple of quick things. I picked up the big. I always get their name wrong. Big Finish, or who is it? It's Big Finish Productions, the guy who do the audiobooks and the audio stories and plays and stuff like that. They did the Survivors, the audio stories, dramas. Plus, they've done a lot of Doctor Who and Blake 7. They released a audiobook of the reading of the Terry Nation novelization of Survivors.
Okay. That's the one that was never made into a. It was written by Terry Nation, but it was never made into an episode, right?
Well, no, it's like I think it's like a combination of like 3 books. I've only found one though that came out in the 70s, but it's the reading of the book. So which I think I don't know if which came first, the book or the series. I think he might have wrote the book afterwards to go along with it. And it's a little bit different. It's being read by Caroline Seymour, who plays. Oh my God! I just been listening to. I can't remember her effing name. Abby Grant. Thank you. She's reading the book. So it's interesting because again, I've seen the series and hearing and doing the book, hearing it a little bit different. They talk about a little bit different things. So it's an interesting perspective, and of course, if you've never read or seen the series, it's a download that you can pick up and listen to the reading of audiobooks. I like them for my drive back and forth to work. So
I suspected for a second as you were crashing on the name Grant,
Abby Grant,
that you were going to go for Servalin. You were just going to call her Commander Servalin from
I might have
from Blake 7, just as a placeholder.
So that's about the only thing really that I've come up with. I mean, there's been some things here and there. I've just been busy with a lot of other crap. The only thing is I got last show I announced the new Deep One, Drew of the Deep One's amulet. I now have the Esoteric Order of Dagon coin, and so I'm going to show that off. It has arrived in Portland, and they're working on getting them up on the website now. So as soon as I get them on the website, I could let people know they're for sale. So that's the drawback of not running your own site anymore. But it's a what that time versus so here if I could get it to focus.
Yay! Yay!
Well, if you say yay, he can't show it.
Yeah, hold on. Can I get the focus here? Hold on. Let me freeze my camera on me so I could get it to focus here. It just doesn't want to focus. It'll focus on my hand sometimes. All right, it doesn't want to focus on it, folks. I'll go. Oh, there you go.
There you go. There you go. Don't move it.
So there's side one of the coin. Again, it's the same Deep One artwork. Again, done by Heather Hudson. So there's side one of the coin.
And what does it say at the bottom? Secrecy, loyalty, breed.
The three oaths.
That's awesome. Secrecy, loyalty, breed.
And then on the back, because it came from the Order of Dagon Hall in Smith, Massachusetts. Here. Again, I lost my focus, but you guys get the point. So that's the new coin, which will be available on the site soon. I'm also working on a Nyarlathotep coin. So why so many coins, Jared? Well, because I like coins. I have a whole little display right here by my desk that's got all the coins I've done plus other coins I've gotten because coins are cool. So
absolutely, and we'll be working on that Delta Green coin come this spring.
Yep. Once we get you guys get the Kickstarter, we'll get the Delta Green coin out there. So all right, so that's really all I had. So I wanted to move on to let's just move on to the cold. Like I said,
I don't have any apocalypses myself because I've been too busy with the Kickstarter, trying to fulfill the Kickstarter for Horrors of War and working on the Delta Green material. So I got nothing in the apocalypses.
Yeah, I got nothing new. I'm sure there's stuff out there. I just haven't really been looking that hard this last 2 weeks. As I said, we were trying to make some decisions on our move and other crap. We got other crap going on, so it's like like I said, this unfortunately sometimes gets to take a back seat. So
real life.
I know. Well, like I said, I did finish playing through the Metro 2033 Redux, and like I said, they changed enough of it to make it different, and that could be, well, you know what? Like I said, cold apocalypse. Now let's define it a little bit. Like as we were talking before the show, is the cold apocalypse only going to be all right? The end of the world was brought on by the cold, or can it possibly also be the end of the world had happened and it's just damn cold because of it afterwards? Because not every apocalypse is cold, is normal or sunshine. A lot of times you get your nuclear winters or you get other things happening and it gets cold as fuck and it stays cold. Like in Metro 2033, it's just a frozen wasteland, after that. So I'm good with both definitions. Like it could have been caused by, the new ice age or the planet being shifted, and Scott will bring up that story. Or I think it's even stuff like how the world afterwards, like, the nuclear war or whatever's happening, blocking out the sun, it's getting colder and colder, because that's really causing a lot of the apocalypse too, because as we know, as things get cold, things get more difficult. Just like if it got hot or if it was, normal, cold brings on its own special challenges, especially in the apocalypse, because in modern day society we have engine block heaters. We have, bulldozers that get snow out of the road. We have all our nice new clothing and heated this and, central air heat or fireplaces or things that keep us warm, But when
keep us not dead.
Yeah, but when after it all goes down and you don't have the modern conveniences, the cold becomes a big problem. Like I was reading to Scott, I came across this little blog site called In Case of Survival, and they talk about the cold and they talk about the winter. And the thing I liked about this one little this 2-3 sentences they wrote talked about, but instead of a warm house and hot chocolate to come home to, you have a drafty, echoey ruin. Your only heat from a bonfire that chokes as much as it warms you. It's going to be unpleasant. So that's what I liked out of that there. So yeah. So like I said, it's like I said, Clint, you got to deal with the cold. You got that negative temperatures. I mean,
Yep.
how does that affect your day-to-day life? You got to go out to the store. You got to get stuff, or you guys just know stuff's coming and you stock up and just wait it out. Essentially,
Well, I
or do you
it's sort of a combination, right? I mean, people still go around about their daily lives and everything like that, and it's we've adapted to the cold the same way that people in Florida adapt to the heat, right? In reverse, but we have all those conveniences. We have block heaters and we have central heat and stuff like that. So most people in the really cold weather get from their heated house, they go into their garage and get in their car and they drive to the store and they run from the walk briskly from the car to the store and stuff like that, and they maintain as high a core temperature and as little time in the cold as possible. But you can't always do that, and that's why people keep survival things, survival kits in their car filled with 12-hour candles and lighters and energy bars and.
All right, let's hear a little bit more about this. Just here you are in 21st century Canada. What city are you living in? Tell the folks which city it is.
Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada.
Okay. And this is a first world country, as modern as it can possibly be.
Pretty much.
And yet, you've still got a survival kit for your car for the winter months, just in case.
Not everybody does that, but the smart people do. Because
so what's in yours?
Run off the road into a ditch here. I mean, where you are, if you run off the road into a ditch, you're usually traveling 300 or 400 feet down into the ditch, right? So where we are, you're not going to die from running off the road unless you're going really fast. But you could spend 12 hours in minus 30-degree temperatures without a car that runs 40 miles from nowhere. In Canada, the population centers are much more concentrated. So we have, say, in Manitoba, we have a city of about 750,000 people called Winnipeg, and that's about 98% of our population for a province that is roughly the size of Texas, right? So in one population center. All of the other ones are, there's two other significant towns, Brandon and Portage-la-Prairie, that probably amount to another 40 or 50,000 altogether. And then the rest of them are in 1,000-person towns and villages and stuff like that. And that's in the south. In the north, the population distribution is even more sparse. So you can spend a long time without seeing folks, especially in bad weather. So being prepared is a good plan.
Now, once upon a time, the Aborigines who were up there, they had an even sparser population. I presume they could put up with the cold by moving south like animals, by being nomadic, by just going south and then going north depending on what time of year it was.
Yeah, I think there's some indication of that.
Is there any indication in your Canadian archaeology of any kind of permanence in that kind of an environment?
Yeah, in the northern areas, like what they call the northern woodlands, as opposed to the Great Plains, like Winnipeg and Manitoba is sort of the what they call the gateway to the Great Plains. We're right on the edge of the Canadian Shield, and so from Winnipeg all the way to the Rockies is the Great Plains, and that was a very highly nomadic area for Native peoples back in the day. The Sioux, the Lakota, the Plains Cree, stuff like that, were all over moving continually. But as I remember from research that I did probably 2.5 decades ago, the woodland native people didn't really migrate as much, so they just hunkered down and lived carefully.
Here's another question about the environment I got to ask is because my impression is that there's a big chunk of Manitoba. Manitoba doesn't have, and Saskatchewan, as the big plains, the prairie provinces, don't have the kind of taiga pine forest that you get in some place like Siberia. That it's a lot. In the summers it becomes hordes of black flies, and in the winter it's frozen into concrete. That's the story I get. When one of the things I think about with the coal is fuel.
Yeah.
And what is there to burn what is there to burn that's not trucked in from the outside or dug out of the ground? I mean, how are you guys set for coal mines, I guess?
Well, we have a fair amount of trees in the north. If you look at a map of Manitoba, you'll see two big lakes right in the middle of it, Lake Winnipeg and Lake Manitoba. And they're the biggest freshwater lakes outside of the Great Lakes, and so they're quite large. And from about there up, it becomes really pretty heavily wooded, as well as further east in Ontario and stuff like that. And then there are wooded areas elsewhere. But yeah, if there were large populations that suddenly needed to go back to using fossil fuels that couldn't be brought up out of the ground, the wood would go away pretty quick. But like I said, the population distribution in northern Manitoba, anywhere from Gimli up, which is right on on Lake Winnipeg, is very low. So we're talking about a handful of people per square mile for most of them. So
yeah, because I'm sure it's very, it's not that it's uninhabitable, but it's not user friendly.
The roads are not great. Large portions of it are native reservations who tend not to be treated terribly well by the Canadian government. So
just like America. But
so there's not much in the way of infrastructure for people moving up and down the height of Manitoba from north and south. So I would venture to say though that people in the north, there's still a lot of native people that are involved in trapping and fishing and not exactly traditional lifestyles, but definitely living closer to the land than say me in urban. I live in an old urban neighborhood in the center of Winnipeg. So I know how to clean a fish, but I haven't done it since I was 16. Stuff like that.
And they're more adapted for, like I said, if the cold apocalypse came, they're probably going to fare a lot better than, even though in your urban zone there, you're used to the cold, but they're used to the cold. They're living it. Whereas you still have a lot of modern conveniences to help out with that. Whereas that's going to be the deciding factor. Once you get the apocalypse and you lose the modern conveniences, this all goes to shit. Like any kind of apocalypse. But I think the extreme cold brings on a different, set of urgency and survival skills.
I'm going to be a bit of a dick here and suggest that in some way the cold has got a couple of extra goody problems we don't normally think about. One of them is your caloric intake goes up in the cold.
Yep.
In order to stay warm, you're going to exhaust your food supplies quicker. You also have the fuel problem of trying to stay warm. One wonders if you wouldn't be better off, if a society or a group wouldn't be better off in a cold apocalypse, because the cold's going to pick off people, and once they're gone, they're not going to exhaust the food supply. And that if the cold thins out the young'uns and the old'uns, maybe that means that the group has a better chance of for long-term survival rather than exhausting their food supply, putting it down bellies that aren't going to be here in a month or two. because of the cold conditions. Because you can't.
And I can see that with the oldins, but with the youngins, they're the ones who are going to need to fill the ranks as the core people start getting older and falling off. You need replacement units to fill in. You know.
Here, so people will manage replacement units.
Yeah, I was about to say there's going to be a gap. What you end up with is a gap where all your toddler age folks who can't even remotely look out for themselves might fall to the wayside, and you've got this weird gap in the generation where you lose those people that age, and once the population settles down to living like Inuit, they can start working on replacements again.
Yeah.
But
they had mentioned that actually they talked about that. When I was listening to the Survivors book, they talk about it a little bit more. About the gauge gap, because there's like mainly middle-aged people, not a lot of kids. Like you have some maybe 7 to 10 early teens, but not a lot of little kids, because even if they survived whatever plague it was, there's nobody to take care of them, and they're gonna drop off, like Scott said. You know.
Yeah. From anything from getting scratched in a piece of rusty metal to running out of food to falling down and breaking bones. But the other thing I was going to sort of throw out there as well is that on the subject of living like Inuit, if you've ever seen, there's a movie out there called Antarajarat, the Fast Runner, which is this really odd film set in Eskimo culture. And you can't tell what year the film is supposed to be set in, because you never see a rifle, and you never see something built by Westerners. So it could be 1500, it could be the year 1000, it could be 9. You don't know when these people are living their life, because it's all the pre-contact stuff. But one of the big things that happens in it is throughout the course of the film, you watch people eat. And the thing that was fucked up and weird about people eating in that environment, that cold environment, was that blubber is burned like oil from animals, fat's burned you just get the food and the meat up to room to just warm enough to chew on. Yep. There is no cooked food. It is just get that stuff up warm enough to chew on, and then that rabbit or that seal or whatever, bird or goes right in, and suddenly cooking isn't a matter of nice roast piece of no, you don't burn up all your fuel getting the temperature that high to roast something. You just warm it up, and you practically are eating it raw. Fish.
Another thing is that so many of the animals that you're talking about wouldn't survive an extended winter.
Yeah.
Right. So. The reason that seals survive is because there's a thaw, and they can come ashore so they can have their pups and let their pups basically grow to something like maturity on shore with short, swimming periods and stuff like that. Same thing with rabbits and all kinds of other creatures. They endure the winter, and they get fat in the spring and summer and fall. Right? If there's no spring and summer and fall, the number of prey animals is going to drop right through the toilet, which means that the food that's available suddenly starts to look like Aunt June that walked out into the cold a couple of months ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, exactly. Besides that, that's a very good point, Clint, about the just animals. Because I was also going to bring up agriculture on top of that, because that's another thing. Agriculture becomes almost non-existent unless you're in greenhouses, because if it's cold, if it's cloudy, if there's no sun, you can't grow crops. The ground is frozen.
We don't get civilization without agriculture. End of story.
Well, we don't get animals without agriculture, because most of the animals at some point have to rely on grain or grasses or flowers or something like that. Even if they're carnivores, they're still eating herbivores. And if the herbivores are gone, the carnivores are gone.
Fortunately, we're not going to necessarily run out of oxygen once we kill off all of our land-based plants, because supposedly the plankton is supposed to make up the difference. That's where most of our oxygen comes from.
Will the plankton be able to generate oxygen if the amount of ice covers, say, 70% of the world?
Yeah, when you were talking about the animals can't live in that environment, it depends on what your cold apocalypse is. Florida and the Caribbean is now living the lifestyle of the Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
Right, where there are only open waters at the equator, and you've got Inuit who are now hunting seals in Haiti because that's where the seals have moved to because they can't live in an ice pack that never opens. Right? They have to have open water to survive. And you've got all these animals pushed south to a certain extent, and people. You might have Inuit, but only if they get to move. If they can move south to Texas, then the Inuit will be fine as long as they have some water and some ice pack to work on. But Texans not so good. They're probably not doing as well.
As long as they got snowshoes, they could make it down, right?
But the idea that there's going to be parts that the further north you go, it's starting to look a lot like. I don't know. What's one of those frozen planets in the outer solar system, like
Neptune, Uranus?
Is it Io is the one that supposedly has an ocean?
Yeah.
Top end and the bottom end of the planet Earth start to look like the surface of Io. Ooh, which actually let's zip over to some of our fictions because that reminds me of A Pail of Air. Do we want to at least go ahead and name drop some of our fictional apocalypses that involve either winter being the primary cause or certainly a major factor in the story?
Yeah, well, bring up that one, and then I'll bring up one from one of our well-renowned loving authors that we've talked about before.
Well, as far as Earth turning into the surface of Io, I wanted to point out there's a 1951 story by Fritz Lieber, the guy who brought us Ferd and the Gray Mouser. It appeared in Galaxy magazine. It's called A Pail of Air. And the basic idea of this story is that there's a group of survivors living in a cave on Earth where Earth has been jerked out of its orbit by a dark star, which I guess was Lieber's 1951 moniker for a black hole that passed through our solar system and jerked a bunch of planets out of orbit with its gravity well. And the Earth is now in an orbit where the atmosphere has frozen and has landed down on the Earth in layers, so that the family that's in this sort of bunker, they have to go outside every day and fetch a pail of frozen oxygen crystals and bring it inside and thaw it out. So not only will it, put more oxygen in their shelter, but it'll actually supply the oxygen for the heating apparatus, which is fired by coal, because they're like living in a cave, so they have to mine coal and then burn it, but it only burns if there's oxygen. And that was definitely a cold apocalypse. By the end of the story, they are, of course, rescued by guys who are scientists from Los Alamos or someplace like that, where they've got nuclear reactors to provide heat for little colonies. But the surface of the Earth is essentially all life is extinct. All life is extinct. There is no oxygen. The Earth is now like Io or one of those moons of Saturn or something like that. That was a pretty fucking cold apocalypse. It doesn't get much colder than frozen oxygen crystals on your doorstep.
And then another book by author John Christopher, which we've talked about before, did a book called The Long Winter, and I have a old copy of that right here, which was a new ice age, came on, freezing up the northern hemisphere. And John Christopher, if you folks didn't know, he's a British author, and he did other things like the Tripods series, as well as No Blade of Grass. So he's done a lot of apocalyptic fiction here.
There's also Wrinkle in the Skin, which is apparently an earthquake apocalypse.
Yeah, he does
it's a seismic apocalypse, yeah.
So in The Long Winter, basically, what is it? It's kind of like, isn't it like reverse British imperialism? Isn't that kind of the theme of the story, really?
Yes, where all the white people have to go to Nigeria to avoid the freezing cold to find food, and they all end up living in slums, and having to work as domestics for the Nigerians, and yes, it's pretty hard. It's not looking too good for Whitey, to say the least.
That they do in the day after the movie too, right? All the northern people from the northern states end up begging to get into Mexico and then crashing through, basically running across the Rio Grande, busting their way into Mexico as illegal aliens to work as wetbacks for Mexican families and stuff like that.
Frostbacks, because they're coming from the frosting. They're frostbacks.
Oh yeah, let's see. Let's talk about that wonderful movie, The Day After Tomorrow.
Hold on, just a second. I wanted to say on the Long Winter, or it's either the Long Winter, the World in Winter, I think was the
original
British title. Yeah. There is an aspect of that sort of like, haha colonialism.
Yeah.
But I also recall there was like aspects where I want to say that that maybe the Russians and the Americans are not asking to come south, but are just invading. Like they're just sort of genocidally pushing aside the Mexicans and the Central Americans, or shooting their way through Canton and Vietnam to get down to some place that isn't frozen.
I don't remember, but it's completely plausible because, again, it's a British perspective of the two superpowers, so I could totally see that being the case.
Yeah.
Especially because this was written, I think let me tell you the date, 50s or 60s. It was
62.
Was it 62?
Well, Wikipedia says so.
Yeah.
Wikipedia is always right. And
Wikipedia is right because that's what it says in the book. So.
Okay.
Kind of Cold War, so.
Yeah. So, and the basic story follows a guy who finally leaves as Britain is breaking down. Leaves, goes to Lagos, and then is given the mission of being basically a native guide for a Nigerian expedition back to England.
Yep.
And I do not remember what they were going back for, but I want to say it might have had something to do with trying to recover Britain's nuclear assets.
I think so. Yeah.
Like the Nigerians are looking to be a nuclear power or something, and they've got some interest in recovering the launch codes or something. But and I want to say it had something to do with like it's still apartheid South Africa, and the Nigerians are like, well, what do you think we're going to use the nukes on? It's going to be the apartheid government of South Africa. And, our hero's like, oh, good, I get to help genocide happen for the price of 3 hots and a cot because I'm a refugee with, absolutely nothing now. He's got absolutely nothing. And I guess part of that is definitely a comment on, the various native peoples who have assisted imperialism over the years. Why would the Crow Indians help the white man? Well, because they were poor and they needed 3 hots and a cot and a bowl of rice, whatever it was that they could get out of the deal because everyone's so destitute.
Yeah. So it was a decent book. There was more going on about that than just really a cold winter,
Yeah, and it certainly was bigger. It's on a bigger scale than No Blade of Grass, right? Because No Blade of Grass is just one group of people's view of the apocalypse, but this one you get this very, very wide view of the world.
Yeah, because it's global in the story. But
you gonna go to Day After Tomorrow?
Yeah, well, Clint just recently watched that by recommendation, and I think I could quote Clint saying that the only thing that would have made that movie tolerable would have been flying sharks or something like that. Yeah.
Well, my wife and I christened it the Dafter Tomorrow.
Because and I said, what about ice sharks? And he's like, that would have been. He goes, that would have been great.
I was actually hoping for ice sharks at points. So.
Yeah, I love the ridiculous. What was it? Reverse tornadoes.
Yeah. Reverse
tornadoes pull the cold of the upper atmosphere down. I'm like, you realize it's cold because it's a vacuum. I mean, there's less and less atmosphere up there, but okay. It's going to pull all the cold down, of which apparently there's a ton, and freezes, literally just, people just freezing in mid-step, all across the world.
Mid-step, and then the actual people that are still alive, the actors, are walking around with their jackets open around their necks and no frost clouding their beards, right? Because if you live where I live and you have a beard, when you're outside, you don't get to see your facial hair. You just get to see a cloud of white stuck to your face. Okay.
How fast does that actually turn into icicles?
It takes a while to turn into icicles, but it becomes frost white covered hair in a minute in the cold, right? But when I was a kid, I used to work flooding outdoor rinks for hockey, and we would shoot the air out of or the water out of the hose and get covered in sprayback and stuff like that, and that stuff would freeze on us within a minute or so, and then you'd get covered in more of it. So you'd actually have to quit doing that and go inside and break all the ice off of your clothes so you could come out and relieve the other guy who was now going in to break all the ice off of his clothes.
One of the things they showed in Entourage, the Fast Runner, was this stuff where the Eskimos, all their drinkable water is in bags that they wear, like, you know, a leather bag around their neck next to their skin. Because unless their body heat is there to liquefy it, it's a rock. You're not drinking that rock. It's not happening.
Nope.
And to go back to Day After Tomorrow, because one of our wait, hold on, am I muted? No. One of our listeners asked a couple questions. I'm going to bring them up here. First thing was about The Day After Tomorrow, because he says he's a fan of Dennis Quaid and enjoyed the movie. I'm sorry, but he goes, "But is the science plausible?" Is the first part of that question. And we kind of talked about that. Is that science plausible? The all of a sudden instant freeze? I don't think so.
I didn't buy the science on the grounds that it was
shenanigans.
It was shenanigans. It was a super fast way to bring on this ice age, which is the kind of thing that, you know, creeps up on you over a century, you know, as opposed to, you know, a weekend.
And one of the things I loved was when the cold was coming and they're running down the hall to get away from the cold.
Oh my God!
And it's stopped by a closed door with a little fire inside. Really?
Yeah, that was only the
villain, right?
The what?
Cold as monster.
Right? Yeah. The cold chases them the same way that heroes in movies have been chased by explosions, usually base explosions. And the other thing that always chases heroes is earthquake. What was that shitty movie?
With John Cusack.
Yeah, what was it called? Not The Day After Tomorrow, or, you know, it wasn't The Day After Tomorrow, but it was like, came out almost. They were close to each other. And I can't remember.
2012, I think it was called.
Yes, that was it. 2012. Where how many times they have to fucking run away from collapsing everything?
The disaster was chasing them and they were running away. It was ridiculous.
Oh my God! Every time we're going to be getting some more of that in San Andreas.
So that was the first part of his question.
Yeah.
Second part of that question was, and which books would you burn first?
I would burn the tables. The huge fucking wooden tables that were
it says what. No, he asked specifically what book would you burn first.
Well, you'll notice that they had a good choice. I believe in the movie they actually said, well, there's all these books that are like the tax code for the state of New York.
Yeah.
We're never going to need that shit again, so we'll just start with the tax codes.
Well, I know what books would be good to burn first because there's a huge supply of them thanks to the Gideons. You know?
There you go.
There's an endless supply of fire starters there.
Which is why that crappy Book of Eli was so crappy. Oh, there's no Bibles left, really. We're gonna run out of
it's only like the #1 printed book ever, you know, so
yeah, that and Scientology, you know, that's it. Well, that's another thing I would burn. If there was any chance of getting rid of every copy of Dianetics, yes, I would. Yes.
Except for the ones etched in metal, you have to do something about that.
I think we can take those and make them into airplanes later, but Because it's titanium. But yes, I'm burning every copy of Scientology's Dianetics I can get my hands on.
No, you want metal ones as heat reflectors, because that fire in the side of that massive room is gonna warm up roughly 5 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna go right out of that fucking room, right? So all those people sitting there underneath their coats, the only heat that they actually have is whatever their bodies are generating.
Yes, because the heat's not even getting through the coat.
Right.
Hey! Stop throwing your reality into my fantasy movies. But
I have a fireplace in my house, and we don't use it in the winter because it's too fucking cold.
Okay, explain that one to me, because that sounds horrifying.
Well, Clint said, it doesn't get very far.
You can have a fire in the winter, right? In our fireplace, and it's a big fireplace. It's about 8 feet across and about 5 feet high, right? With an aperture that's maybe 4 by 3 or something like that. It's a good-sized fireplace in an old house with high ceilings, right? We have not great insulation, and it doesn't heat our front room that the fireplace is in, let alone the other several rooms of the house, right? So if we have our heat turned down and we rely on the fireplace, we're going to be sitting in the fucking coals trying to stay warm.
Mm.
So
that's grimo.
You can still cook food on it, like you can put wieners on it and stuff like that, but most of the heat ends up going out the top of the fireplace.
All right, now he had a second question here, and by the way, it looks like you got a is that a snow leopard you got over your left hand shoulder there, Clint?
Yeah, it's actually it's not that close. It's much further away, but big. I think it's only about 4 feet away. It's actually 40 feet away and the size of a tiger. So.
Oh, nice.
That's it.
Second question: the tagline of winter is coming. Does that make Game of Thrones a cold apocalypse?
No. Ooh, that's an interesting point, because all the bad critters are winter monsters.
Yes, but I never watched Game of Thrones. But isn't that only winter is just like a season? It's not a forever thing?
Their winters in their world are like 7 years long.
Oh, really?
They go through a warm period and a cold period. It has something to do with Martin's orbit. The story is he actually figured out an orbit for a planet that would create long winters and long summers. And their world has long winters and long summers.
So they have so it's kind of like a mini cold apocalypse, not a micro. It's like a mini because it doesn't last forever.
Yeah, their winters a bad winter is 8 years long. Okay, good winters are 4, 3.
But the Game of Thrones is a winter apocalypse, the same way that like Playboy is porn. It never shows up, right? It's always up there in the middle, like up in the north with the Black Watch fighting and shit like that, and the monsters threatening to come south. But it's they never give you the big reveal. You never get to see pubes. So
yeah, you never actually see the things don't act. The White Walkers actually.
Hold on. So in Game of Thrones, you don't see any pubes? Is you're trying to say?
Oh no, you see lots of pubes.
But no winter.
No winter. Okay. Yeah. There's more pubes in Game of Thrones than there is. Well, they show off pubes in the winter.
Yeah. Well, you say you never get to see the winter. That's because winter is coming. It hasn't got there yet. It's coming.
Right. So then does that make it a cold apocalypse? Right?
No.
Or is it
it's certainly a threatening one.
Yeah, it's just a tease. So.
Yeah, but it doesn't deliver. It's a good point. Okay.
Now the last
movie I've seen that's a cold apocalypse is The Colony.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Colony. Then I want to bring up his third question.
And I want to point out that both The Colony and Day After Tomorrow were made in Canada. So apparently, you give these Canucks a shot at the apocalypse, and the first thing they think of is snow. For good reason, apparently. From what you're describing, Clint.
I don't know where those movies were made, but they weren't made in the cold.
No, but they were shot in Toronto. That's where they made the Day After Tomorrow. And The Colony, yes, was still made in Canada by a Canadian production company.
But it was definitely a cold apocalypse. The world had gone cold, and they talked about a lot of things. They're surviving. They're underground for warmth. They have greenhouses to try to grow food. There's no light. Resources are scarce because that's how it would get to be. Because things wouldn't work. Because the first round of cold. How long are just to think about it, engines and cars going to let? They're going to, unless you got antifreeze, and the antifreeze is going to eventually go out of those, it's going to crack your engines because the water's going to. That's why you have antifreeze, because the water cracks your engine. So you're going to lose vehicle because it's going to get so cold. If it's a cold apocalypse, that the antifreeze ain't going to work.
I got the impression that they were getting their power from wind generation.
Yeah, but that's still equipment. If it's that cold. Yeah. It's gears and motors and stuff moving. How do you keep something lubed? I mean,
well,
oil.
I'll tell you how the Russians did it. When they sent their little tank or little crawler up to the moon, one of their questions was, how do we lubricate the gears and the engines? They actually used powder because it was so cold on the moon, obviously, that any liquid lubricant would freeze. They use this microfine powder to make the gears work, and I can think of some. There's definitely some science fiction out there where people have got you're going to fire a gun in space. Well, you can't oil a gun because the oil will freeze. Instead, the gun is rubbed with that microfine powder to cut down on the friction, so you can fire it in an environment that's that cold as outer space.
And just so we're clear, I could be wrong, but I believe that the antifreeze that we have around here is good for something like minus 56 degrees.
No!
Wow.
Oh, I mean, okay, it's Canada, so we have that. Whereas if the cold apocalypse comes to Kansas, chances are there won't be antifreeze for minus 56 degrees Celsius.
I don't know. Kansas actually has some horrible cold. It's when it gets to Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, Louisiana, that everyone's going to be standing around like frozen statues.
So The Colony was it was a good cold apocalypse film, so they touched on those things of real survival. And, of course, they threw in, one of the standard tropes, of the bad guys. Let's not spoil that because it's still a recent movie, but it's a trope. You've seen it before,
Yeah.
But I was happy with the trope as opposed to another. They could have used other tropes like, oh, it's supernatural, or it's mutant monsters or something, the bad guys. But it's a trope that I think made a little more sense in that environment, Well,
speaking of cold apocalypses, we were discussing how the road fit in, because the road has this thing where the temperatures are down everywhere. There's no new life. Because
there's no sun. Everything's dying.
Yeah. It did have a cold apocalypse feel to it on some levels,
Oh, yeah?
This miserable cold.
10 years later, everything's cold, slush, dead trees, there's nothing.
Yeah. So certainly the road might fall into a cold apocalypse. Even though we don't know what it was that brought the world to this level. Is it ash in the upper atmosphere from nuclear war? Is it a nuclear winter? We don't really know. They don't tell us. But boy, Viggo Mortensen looks miserable the whole movie long. He just doesn't look like. He looks like he needs a fucking fire.
Yeah. Well, what about the time where he encountered the guy who took their shit, and he takes all his shit? He's like, man, don't do me like this, because he left him with nothing.
Literally in his shorts. I think they almost did they leave him naked with no shoes, with his feet on that cold ground.
Underwear.
Oh, the ground's just sucking the heat out of the soles of his feet. Man, he's gonna. That's why the cold apocalypses scare me so much. Is cold will kill you so goddamn fast.
Yep.
Maybe even I think it'll kill you faster than the heat, won't it?
Yeah. I mean, the kind of heat that we're capable of. Go ahead, sir.
I was putting money in a meter yesterday when I was going to my friendly local gaming store, and first of all, the meter was frozen, so it wouldn't take my credit card. Secondly, when I spent 2 minutes with my glove off, handling the credit card and working the keys for the parking meter, the computerized parking meter, and I had tears coming to my eyes from the degree of pain in my hand from the wind chill and the cold in 2 minutes of not handling metal tools or gun handles or that kind of shit like they always show in cold apocalypse stuff, where they're walking along and they've got their hoods up but they've got no gloves, right? And their hands aren't just frozen lumps of meat on the ends of their stumps, stuff like that. So
sometimes you get a little of that whenever you find like some nice World War II film set in Stalingrad.
Oh yeah.
And they show how cold these German gentlemen are in the Russian winter. That's when it starts to look like, the Russians are attacking, but my hands don't work anymore. Whoops.
Well, they're just wearing leather jack boots, right? It's just awful. Your feet, pieces fall off if you're not careful with your feet in the cold.
Oh, yeah. Again, that article I was reading about cold survival, they're like, yeah, you get yourself a good pair of insulated, warm winter boots, because like leather boots ain't going to do it. You're going to lose your toes, you know?
Nope.
Yeah, I got a pair of those rubberized duck boots with the big felt, lining inside, and I took those with me to Russia. The one time I went, and it was in the winter, and even so, I did not have the right kind of pants. All I had were jeans. So I'm wearing like jeans with sweatpants and long underwear inside them to try and make up the difference. And it was just a good thing that I wasn't, outdoors as much as I could have been, because that parka and those gloves and those boots didn't make a damn bit of difference when that wind blew right through my cojones. Holy shit!
Oh yeah,
it was horrifying.
It's been a couple of decades since we've had a storm that has literally shut down the city where I live, but we've had a few in my lifetime. I think the last one was in the mid '90s, something like that, and there were no cars moving. The only people that were moving were the regular forces with half tracks, stuff like that, and people on snowmobiles. And they organized snowmobile caravans to take people to hospital and to dig people out of snowbanks and stuff like that. And I remember walking down Portage Avenue, which is one of the main streets in our town, and you couldn't see the ground floor of most of the buildings on Portage Avenue. It was just like the snow had sort of piled up, drifted up on the sides, so that the windows on the ground floor were effectively covered.
Oh, dear
all it takes, what was it, Scott? What it was, like an inch of snow in Seattle? It shut it down like a couple years ago.
There was a big to do because the mayor and the city council made about 5 bad decisions in a row about how they're going to deal with snow. And one of the things they decided they weren't going to do anymore was put down any salt because it was bad for the environment. And I'm like, which was insane because we don't put down salt more than 2 times a decade. I mean, we only put down. It's not Milwaukee. It's not Toledo. It's not Sheboygan or Winnipeg, and so they're like, oh no, we don't do salt's bad for the environment, and so they didn't put. It'll get washed into Lake Washington, and despite the fact all of our sewers dump into the saltwater sound, but regardless, we got like 4 inches, maybe 5, and it was right during Christmas. Oh, the snow tiger is attacking Clint.
Clint, watch out!
Too cold. That's too cold.
But it absolutely paralyzed the city because the city did not have any of the infrastructure in place. They had made a decision, based on sort of ecological panic reasons, not to be prepared. And it hit right during Christmas of 2008 when every merchant was depending during the economic crash on people coming out, and people could not get out of their houses to go shop. And what do you know? We got a new mayor the next,
Well, it was like
But imagine that level of snow where you are, sir.
Forget it. Oh no, it was
for Halloween.
Last year, there was like an inch of snow in Atlanta, and it shut the city down.
You're right.
An inch in Atlanta, which gets snow. You know, they get cold, they get snow. An inch shut the city down. People were trapped in their cars for like 12 hours. You know, it's insane. So yeah, cold is bad.
Christmases, we get white Halloweens.
Oh shit! You were telling me, Clint, that like in July you still had snow on the ground, like in piles in places.
We have our snow clearing area in Winnipeg becomes a mountain by the end of the winter. And
is that where all the snow is dumped from around the city?
Yeah, basically all the snow from street clearing and stuff like that gets piled into one huge mountain. I mean, Winnipeg is literally as flat as a pancake, right? There's no hills or anything like that. But this one mountain is all snow and the sand. We don't put salt down. Winnipeg, they scatter sand, right? So between the snow and the sand, it's really resistant to heat, like to melting, right? So even in July and August, when we're getting, 90-degree temperatures Fahrenheit, right? We've still got a mountain of snow that's probably 25 feet high, right? In places like this one last mountain of snow.
Good.
So I don't know when it finally goes, but I remember emailing Jared at the time because we were IMing back and forth on Facebook, and the local press had just put up a story that Mount Winnipeg was still there, hasn't fully melted yet, and it was, I think, the end of July, just coming up to going to Gen Con time.
Arg.
And I know
in Winnipeg, everybody buys their kids Halloween costumes that are big enough for parkas to go underneath. Because we have probably half of our Halloweens have snow on the ground. So.
Third question for everybody I wanted to ask them is, what three things would you do? What three things would be on your cold apocalypse wish list or survival list?
Dogs. Dogs for a dog sled, because you can eat them eventually. I'm going to vote for dogs. And what the fuck would be on my list?
Well, let's make an assumption here that if you have a cold apocalypse survival list, that you're already kind of in a cold, maybe. So maybe you have some basic, at least clothing. So you'd have to say, well, everybody has to have a parka. Let's say other bits of gear. Well,
I'll tell you what. I think I'd vote for a Moisen Nagant rifle, because everything I hear about those old World War II vintage Russian rifles was that they had a really good reputation for working in sub-zero temperatures, that they wouldn't freeze up because they were not the most, maybe they weren't, as quite the queen of the gun range like the Mauser 98, but they seem to work under all the worst, most horrible conditions. So God knows I'd like something reliable. I'd like a nice, reliable bolt-action rifle. That would be nice. And I'm still not sure I should say anything bad about a dog sled.
Well, from the man who lives in the Great White North, what would you have, Clint?
It's going to sound stupid, but toilet paper and alcohol.
That's
you can
true.
do a lot besides the obvious with toilet paper and alcohol.
Start fires?
Not just start fires, but if you can make a toilet paper lamp with alcohol and toilet paper that burns a lot longer and hotter than either of those things by themselves. So
I like that plan.
Because, like you say, wood becomes problematic. So, or at least any kind of fuel.
I would have no idea, living in Florida for 35 years. I would probably say naive things like one of those little fire starter things, because maybe you got to be able to at least start a fire.
Oh, good call. Yes, one of those ones that you just hand crank with the something that's maybe a fire starter, because fire is going to be, as Jack London let us know, being able to get a fire starter is important. Yep. Fire starter, if it's going to be snow, I would say even maybe a good pair of snowshoes. Good pair of snowshoes is even better than the dog sled team.
Because you got to be able to you can move in snow, but the snowshoes are going to help you move even better. At least you can move around. And thirdly,
There's one in the colony. They wore snowshoes on their backs
yeah.
everywhere they went. Never used them.
Oh, like when they were walking across the snow, they didn't fucking use them?
Walking over dunes of snow that were like 15 feet high, and their feet are going in about an inch.
Yeah, okay.
So that's not actually how that works. Oh.
That's why you're supposed to use snowshoes, because it distributes your weight so you can walk over them.
I'm definitely voting for the manual fire starter that would make sparks so you could do an ignition source without fuel, and the snowshoes. Those are two really good suggestions.
I got one more.
Okay.
A hand crank flashlight. You can get little flashlights that have a crank and a dynamo, so that it'll store energy for a little while. It doesn't need batteries, and at least where we are, it's not just the winters, but in the winter the nights last for freaking ever.
Yeah, we got a lot of those things down here because of hurricanes. Hand cranked radios and flashlights are things that are sold and marketed down here because when your power goes out,
Same here, for exactly the same reason, because we have power outages in January. So.
Wow. What are your winters the kind of thing that you just have to have some? Does everybody have a backup generator? Does everybody have? Nope. Does everybody have a pile of wood outside?
We have a pile of wood that will keep us for a couple of days. If the power goes out, we can burn in our fireplace and survive. But all of our stuff will be moved down to the front room because the rest of the house will start to develop frost on surfaces, right?
On the insides.
Yeah, on the insides, yeah. I was
the moisture in the air starts to turn to frost.
Well, we'll look at and this is the last thing I'm going to bring up because I want to start wrapping this up here. Let's talk about a micro cold apocalypse, kind of, sort of, maybe, is the Thing,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, me and Clint talked about that because remember when they go into the basement storage, everything's frozen because they're not heating it.
Yep.
So it's the frost, and that's what your house is gonna look like, right, Clint?
Absolutely, right.
Well, it's even worse because
but you don't need one once the power goes out. You can store it on the floor, right? So we got a freezer full of meat, but we don't. Once it's cold everywhere else, you can just store your meat everywhere.
That's what she said.
I wanted to throw out a couple of more of our snowpocalypses. Of course, there was Snowpiercer, right?
Snowpiercer.
We talked about recently. Snowpiercer definitely, and it's almost an identical cold apocalypse to the Colony. Oh no, global warming. Well, we'll fix it with science. Oops, we broke the Earth. Yeah. And now everything's frozen. Although, again, Snowpiercer was less about the snow and the cold as it was about haves and have-nots and the 1% versus the rest of us. But still, cold apocalypse is the setting for that one. There's the Midnight Sun, which is the Twilight Zone episode.
Yep.
Where the woman's having the nightmares about the city melting from the heat, and the paint is running on paintings, and she's freaking out from the sunstroke, and it turns out she's just having a delirious dream because the world is freezing. And she's
come on! Spoiler alert, Scott. That episode only came out 60 years ago.
Yeah, and the thing that always got me about that one is I want to say it was the same problem.
The Earth was moved further away from the sun.
Yeah, that it was the same problem in Pale Bear. So Midnight Sun, there's a comic from the late 80s called Winter World. Which
they've IDW is now redoing. It's out now.
It was Chuck Dixon and Jorge Zaffino did it back in the 80s, but I don't know. But Zaffino's gone, so I don't know who's illustrating it now. But it's back.
Yeah, he died in 2002.
Okay.
And it's IDW's redoing it, so that's coming out again. And there's Yeah, I mean, there's some books. There's like that.
There's a collected paperback of the original comics available. You can get it on Amazon, not a problem. It's like $13. You know.
That's pretty cheap.
And I was trying to look up how many pages it is. 152 pages, $13, and it's the original Winter World from 1988.
And there's also there's a web comic that I discovered like 10 years ago called Post Nuke Comic. He only got about 10 issues out. It's about this guy and his dog surviving in a nuclear winter. It's I mean he hasn't had an update to the site since like 2012, and but it's out. It's literally postnukecomic.com. I read through it a little bit. It's okay, but again, it's in a winter world, and it's interesting because again, he kind of brings up. It looks like he brings up things that like Clint talks about, like his face is covered with like a breather because it freezes up because of the cold air, so covers his eyes. He has a dog, but the dog is even wrapped like in like strips of cloth and has like a breather on. So he kind of looks like he kind of addresses extreme cold a little bit in this web comic.
Yeah. The last one I'm going to throw out as far as films with cold apocalypses is the film Quintet from 1979, directed by Robert Altman, who's supposed to be a good director, but not on this movie. This film has Paul Newman in it, a couple other actors. Is Fernando Rey, I know him, and I don't know some of the other actors here off of the IMDb listing. But the basic deal is it's set in a frozen world. There has been some sort of new ice age, and society has collapsed, and it's all over now, except for the shouting. And the one thing that's going on in the sorry, my phone keeps ringing. So somebody really wants to talk to me. Perhaps they didn't like my review of Quintet, and they're calling directly. But it's this thing where the city that they go, there's one city, it's never identified. It's clearly falling apart. There doesn't appear to be anything like government. There's just families living in the ruins and dogs eating the dead in the streets. And Paul Newman plays this guy who's this sort of seal hunter who's run out of seals. And he's come back to the city to sort of regroup with his family or something. But the entire city is obsessed with playing this game called Quintet. And at first it looks like it's a chess game played on a board, but eventually you discover that the game is essentially like Steve Jackson's The Assassination Game, where everyone's just murdering everyone, to win the game of Quintet. And while that sounds like a really great idea for a movie, Robert Altman sucks all the life out of this film by having it proceed at a pace slightly slower than the glaciers that destroyed civilization. Nothing happens forever and ever and ever. I remember it as being mind-numbingly boring, with performances that are so muted as to be just characterless. So I can't give any kind of a thumbs up to Quintet, but if you're interested to see some, 1979 apocalypses, because again, they had some good ones back then, but this is not necessarily one of them. But clearly they didn't think we were going to do the weather was going to get us, or the nukes or the disease, Mega Man, or we breed each other to death in Soylent Green, speaking of cannibals, it's in that same sort of vein, but it doesn't have any of the Colony, Day After Tomorrow. These might not be great films, but at least something happens.
Yep.
Yeah, I liked The Colony more than I liked The Day After Tomorrow.
So that's easy.
Me too. Yeah.
That's easy.
That's easy. So that's going to be it for Cold Apocalypse this week, folks. We covered a lot of territory. Like I said, there's not a lot of material out there. But like I said, we talked a lot about real possible cold apocalypses and what they get wrong because of our cold expert Clint Staples. But no, Clint, you put a really good perspective on it because you live in a cold environment a lot of times of the year, and there's real shit that happens with it that they don't really take into account. So
I got to tell you,
I would like to point out in closing, as the cold expert, as you put it, that I actually do everything possible, as do most other people who live up here, to stay out of the cold as much as possible. So that is how people mostly try and deal with the cold in the really bad months here, right? The people that I have a lot of admiration for are people like city workers and other people who are out doing roofing or other really horrible jobs, totally exposed to really cold weather and horrid wind chills. So
roofing? Jesus.
Yep.
You can't leave that till spring, huh? No?
I need a new roof on part of my house, and the roofer that I was talking to said, well, we're free after December. They roof all the way through the winter.
Oh my God.
I guess when you need a roof, you need a roof,
Well, and more importantly, I guess if you got to eat, you got to eat, right? But
yeah.
It's just horrible.
You'd think you'd take a vacation to Florida.
I know. So.
See, when it comes to the cold, the thing that scares me is you could be dropped into a desert environment in your street clothes, and you're going to make it a couple of days until you dehydrate, or sunstroke. Yeah. But there are things you can do just in your street clothes to protect yourself. You're dropped into a winter environment in your street clothes. That's just your life oozing away with every calorie. And
you're fucked by dinner time. You're done.
Yeah, it's killing you in hours or minutes, depending on how awful it is. You talk about dropping people in water that's just the hypothermia levels of water, which is what? Something like 50-degree water?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be 39 degrees or something. Or 50-degree water will kill you in minutes.
Yep.
That's pretty horrifying to me. And cold gets you quick.
Yep.
You got almost no opportunities to fix the problem you're in before it's got you. Unlike the heat or the dry or a desert, which is the other end of the nasty scale, I guess.
Exactly. So, like I said, we've determined that, the cold apocalypse, like I said, it's going to be unpleasant. Yeah. So that's it, folks.
On the plus side, it might be quick.
Yeah, it will be quick. So anyway, we're not sure what's going to be next show. We haven't actually talked about it yet, but as usual, we'll come up with something. Don't you worry. We'll entertain you for an hour plus every 2 weeks. Don't worry.
We got a million of them.
Yeah, we got a million things to talk about. So maybe we'll do the polar opposite. We'll talk about the heat apocalypse next time.
Well, we'll get at least one German film, right?
Heat. Or hell.
At least that one. And, there's got to be more.
Yeah, we'll do some research. Well, when we decide, folks, we'll let you know. So that's it, folks. So for Podcast at Ground Zero, thank you, Clint Staples, for joining us this week. It's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you, Adam Baum Glancy, for being here as usual. I don't know. I'm not good.
Where else am I gonna go?
What else you got?
I got nothing.
Yeah, you got nothing to write about. Don't you worry about that. And thank you, Jared, the Apocalypse Nerd Wallace, for being here as he talks about himself in third person.
So it's the first sign that hypothermia is setting in as you begin to refer to yourself in the third person.
Exactly. So again, thank you, folks. Thank you for joining us. Again, if you like what you see here, remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel, like what you see there, because all that, the likes and the feedback does help. So until next time, again, we'll be back on our normal. Again, we're on our normal 2-week track now that the holidays are over. So we'll see in 2 weeks what we're going to do. It's a mystery for now. We'll surprise you. So this is Podcast at Ground Zero signing off. Thank you and good night.
Good night.